Picture this. You're a marketing director in London. In 2021, you earned $95,000. You've worked hard, received modest pay rises, just 2% annually, barely keeping pace with inflation. 4 years later, in 2025, your salary has grown to $102,910. You should feel better off, but you don't. Because while your salary grew by 8%, your tax bill grew by 60%. Welcome to fiscal drag. And it's not just affecting high earners. It's a hidden tax squeeze hitting millions of British workers, from nurses to teachers to small business owners. By 2030, the UK's tax burden will reach 38.3% of GDP, the highest peacetime level ever recorded. Higher than any point in the post-war era. Higher than the 1970s. Higher than during the 2008 financial crisis. This isn't an accident. It's a calculated gamble by the government. Raise taxes massively to fix public services and fund welfare, without technically breaking election promises. But workers are paying the price. Take-home pay is stagnating. Business investment is collapsing. And Britain is becoming less competitive than its European rivals. Today, we're going to examine how the 2025 budget locked Britain into the highest tax burden in modern history, what it means for your wallet, and whether this gamble will actually work, or whether we're just bankrupting the very people who drive economic growth. Let's start with the numbers that should alarm everyone. On November 26, 2025, Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivered the autumn budget. The headline? Tax rises totaling $26 billion per year by 2030. The Office for Budget Responsibility projects the overall tax burden will climb from 36.3% of GDP in 2025 to 26 to 38.3% by 2030-31. To put that in perspective, in the mid-2010s, the UK tax burden was around 33 to 34% of GDP. Post-pandemic, it climbed into the mid-30s. This budget adds roughly 1 full percentage point of GDP on top of already elevated levels. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, if an election were held today, the overall tax rises announced in this parliament would exceed those announced in any other parliament since at least 1970. This is historic, not in a good way. So where is all this money coming from? 3 main sources. First, fiscal drag. The government extended the freeze on income tax thresholds for another 3 years, until April 2031. That's a decade-long freeze. The personal allowance has been stuck at $12,570 since April 2021. The higher rate threshold frozen at $5,270. Normally, these thresholds rise with inflation, but they haven't, and they won't, for 10 years. What does this mean practically? If the personal allowance had been adjusted for inflation, it would be $15,080 for 2025 to 26, a difference of $2,910. Taxpayers with incomes of $15,980 or more will pay at least $582 more in income tax this year, compared to a scenario where thresholds kept pace with inflation. By 2030-31, the OBR estimates the personal allowance would be $4,120 higher and the higher rate threshold $2,120 higher if they had risen with inflation. The cumulative effect? The government expects to collect additional tax receipts of $55.5 billion in 2030-31 alone from frozen thresholds. That's more than the entire annual NHS England budget increase being discussed. The Institute for Fiscal Studies calls this likely the largest overall tax increase from a single policy in the post-war period. Second, direct tax increases. The budget raised dividend tax by 2 percentage points, taking rates to 10.75%, 35.75%, and 39.35%. Savings and rental income tax also rose by 2 percentage points from 2027. A new high-value property surcharge applies to residential properties worth over $2 million. Salary sacrifice pension contributions are capped at $2,000 from 2029. And for businesses, employer national insurance contributions increased significantly from April 2025, raising an estimated $25 billion annually by itself. Third, stealth taxes and smaller measures. A 3p per mile charge on fully electric vehicles from 2028. A mansion tax on homes worth over $2 million, raising $400 million. Increased duties on remote gambling from 21% to 40%, raising over $1 billion. VAT relief removed for low-value imports. Individually, these seem small. Together, they add up to the most comprehensive tax-raising budget in a generation. If you're finding this analysis valuable, consider subscribing. We break down complex economic policies into clear, evidence-based explanations. No partisan spin, just facts and what they mean for your finances. Hit that subscribe button and let's continue. So what does this mean for actual workers? Let's follow Sarah, our marketing director, earning $95,000 in 2021, receiving 2% annual pay rises. By 2025, she earns $102,910. But here's the problem. While her salary grew modestly, she crossed the $100,000 threshold, triggering the personal allowance taper. Between $100,000 and $125,000 to $140,000, you lose $1 of personal allowance for every $2 earned. This creates an effective marginal tax rate of 60%. That's right, 60%. Sarah is losing 40% to income tax, and another 20% because she's losing the value of her personal allowance. Over the decade-long freeze, an earner who progresses from $100K to $112K could lose $8,000, $12,000 to fiscal drag alone. And it's not just high earners. The median full-time UK salary is now around $37,000, $38,000 gross. After tax and national insurance, that's roughly $2,900 take-home, about $2,153 per month. For a typical worker earning $35,000 in 2025 to 26, by 2031 to 32, fiscal drag will cost them approximately $5,000, $8,000 extra over the freeze period if their wages keep pace with inflation. Money that could have gone toward savings, a house deposit, or everyday expenses. The OBR estimates that by 2028-29, the freeze would pull an additional 2.6 million people into paying income tax and 2.1 million into the higher rate band. With the extension to 2031, these numbers will be even higher. In 2030-31 alone, an estimated 920,000 more people will be pulled into the 40% higher tax rate compared to just 1 year earlier. That's nearly 5 million more higher rate taxpayers than there would have been had there been no freezes to thresholds at all. Even pensioners are being dragged in. The state pension continues to rise under the triple lock, currently $230.25 per week. As it approaches the frozen personal allowance, more pensioners will start paying income tax for the first time. ICAEW notes, this adds considerable strain on HMRC as thousands of pensioners enter the tax system. And here's the cruel twist. While taxes rise, real household income growth is projected to fall. The OBR forecasts real household disposable income per person will grow by only about 0.25% per year over the forecast period, well below the last decade's average of 1% per year. Research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows the average household income after housing costs stood at $42,130 per year as of September 2025, still below pre-COVID levels. For the poorest fifth of households, median income in 2023-24 was no higher than it was 19 years previously. An unprecedented stretch of income stagnation since data collection began in 1961. So taxes are rising, real incomes are stagnating, and workers are being squeezed from both sides. If workers are struggling, businesses are in crisis. A Confederation of British Industry survey from late 2024 revealed that 63% of firms cited tax concerns as a major challenge, a record high. Business confidence has collapsed to its lowest level in nearly 3 years. When asked how their business would respond to further tax rises in the 2025 budget, 56% said they would cut staff or freeze recruitment. 45% would consider raising prices. 39% would reduce investment. The Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales reports that 60% of businesses say the tax burden is a growing challenge, a tenfold rise from just 6% in Q3 2020. And it's not just sentiment. Investment is actually falling. Growth in capital investment declined from 2.3% in Q2 2025 to 1.8% in Q3, the weakest since Q4 2023. Employment growth dropped from 1.4% in Q2 to 0.9% in Q3, the lowest point in 4 years. Expectations for employment growth over the next year sit at 1.2%, the lowest level in 5 years. Why? Because from April 2025, employers face higher national insurance contributions, raising an estimated $25 billion annually, a 7% increase in the national living wage to $12.71 per hour, frozen thresholds meaning more employees pushed into higher tax bands, demanding higher gross salaries to maintain take-home pay. For small and medium-sized enterprises, the backbone of the UK economy, these cost increases are crippling. Labor-intensive sectors like hospitality, retail, and care face the heaviest burden. One small construction firm in Scotland told the British Chambers of Commerce the NIC's increase was a hammer blow to business confidence, causing a reversal in plans to increase investment and halting further job creation. This story is being echoed across the country. And here's the bigger problem. Business investment growth for 2026 is forecast at just 0.8%, down from 3.7% in 2025. The slowdown is attributed to global economic uncertainty and, crucially, challenging domestic fiscal policy. Britain now faces a toxic combination: high taxes, low investment, stagnant productivity, and weakening business confidence. It's an economic doom loop. And it's getting worse. Research from the London School of Economics estimates that weaker business investment accounts for about a third of the total GDP gap now linked to Brexit. Investment uncertainty, from Brexit, from tax volatility, from regulatory changes, has left UK business investment lagging behind European competitors for years. Businesses need certainty to invest. They're not getting it. If you're learning something from this deep dive, drop a comment below. What's your experience with the tax burden? Are you a business owner facing these challenges? A worker seeing your take-home pay stagnate? Share your perspective. I read every comment, and your insights help shape future videos. So Britain's tax burden is hitting 38.3% of GDP. How does that compare to our European competitors? France has the highest tax-to-GDP ratio in the OECD at 43.8% in 2023. Denmark comes second at 43.4%. Germany sits around 40 to 41%. At first glance, Britain's 38.3% looks moderate. But there's a crucial difference. France, Germany, and Denmark have always had high tax burdens. Their economies, labor markets, and social contracts evolved around comprehensive welfare states. Businesses and workers expect high taxes in exchange for excellent public services, generous pensions, and robust social safety nets. Britain is different. For decades, the UK positioned itself as a lower tax, more business-friendly alternative to continental Europe. The tax-to-GDP ratio in the mid-2010s was 33 to 34%, substantially below France and Germany. Now Britain is converging toward European tax levels, but without the corresponding service quality. NHS waiting lists exceed 7.3 million. Social care is chronically underfunded. Public transport infrastructure lags behind European standards. And British workers increasingly pay more, but receive less. Moreover, Britain's corporate tax rate of 25%, while the lowest in the G7, as the government proudly claims, is no longer dramatically competitive. France temporarily raised its top corporate rate to 36.1% in 2025, but that's an outlier driven by a specific surtax on high-revenue companies. Most advanced economies cluster between 20–30%. And here's the kicker. Tax competitiveness isn't just about rates. It's about simplicity, certainty, and total burden. On the Tax Foundation's 2025 International Tax Competitiveness Index, Germany ranks 20th and the UK even lower. France ranks 38th out of 38 OECD countries, dead last. Why complexity, frequent changes, unpredictability? British businesses now face annual budget uncertainty as chancellors tweak rates and thresholds, diverging tax rules across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, complex VAT systems with sector-specific rates and thresholds, an overstretched HMRC with declining service standards, ever-changing R&D tax credits, capital allowances, and incentive schemes. This creates what economists call planning paralysis. Businesses delay investments because they don't know what the tax environment will look like in 2 years. Compare this to Switzerland, also a high-income European country. Switzerland's tax-to-GDP ratio is around 28 to 29%. It achieves a low tax burden through federal policy choices and intense local tax competition. Businesses and individuals can choose between cantons offering different tax rates and public service levels. Result? Stable, predictable, competitive. Switzerland attracts international businesses, skilled workers, and investment. Britain is doing the opposite. High taxes, low predictability, declining competitiveness. And workers and businesses are paying the price. So here's the trillion-pound question. Will this massive tax increase actually work? The government's logic is straightforward. Raise $26 billion annually, stabilize public finances, invest in the NHS and schools, lift the two-child benefit cap, and ultimately boost growth through better services. On paper, it's rational. The NHS is in crisis, social care is collapsing, infrastructure needs investment, welfare cuts were causing hardship. But there are 3 enormous problems with this plan. Problem 1. The money might not materialize. Tax increases depend on economic behavior. If high earners shift income into pensions, if businesses cut investment, if consumers spend less, tax revenues underperform. The OBR itself warns that forecasts are highly sensitive to growth assumptions. If growth undershoots by just 0.3 percentage points per year, GDP is about 1.5% lower by 2029, slicing perhaps $10–15 billion off expected annual revenues. If new taxes underperform, for example, if high earners reduce pension contributions more than expected, or if the EV mileage tax yields less as adoption slows, the fiscal gap widens further. The current fiscal headroom of $22 billion could shrink to nearly zero, forcing either further tax rises or a relaxation of fiscal rules. Problem 2. Growth is slowing. The OBR upgraded GDP growth for 2025 to 1.5%, but downgraded medium-term forecasts. Growth for 2026 falls to 1.4%, then 1.5% for 2027, before declining further. Crucially, cumulative GDP growth over the next 5 years is now about 0.8% lower than forecast in March 2025. Real GDP per person grows by an average of just 1.1% per year, 0.3 percentage points slower than previously expected due to weaker productivity growth. Business investment is forecast at 0.8% in 2026. Consumer spending remains modest. Export growth is constrained by global trade friction. In other words, the economy is slowing precisely when the tax burden peaks. Higher taxes suppress growth. Lower growth reduces tax revenues. Reduced revenues force higher taxes. It's a vicious cycle. Problem 3. The public won't see immediate improvement. Even if the money comes in as planned, public services won't improve overnight. The NHS needs structural reform, not just cash. Social care requires workforce expansion, which takes years. Infrastructure projects have long lead times. Meanwhile, workers see higher taxes now but won't see better services for years, if ever. This creates political risk. If voters feel they're paying more for nothing, backlash is inevitable. And if the economy slows, unemployment rises, or inflation returns, the government's political capital evaporates. The Resolution Foundation warns, black holes and consolidations will define the next parliament. The fiscal choices are brutal: more austerity, more taxes, or abandoning fiscal rules. None are popular. Britain's 38.3% tax gamble is the biggest fiscal experiment in a generation. The government is betting that workers and businesses will absorb massive tax increases without cutting spending, investment, or productivity. It's betting that $26 billion in new revenue will materialize despite slower growth. And it's betting that voters will tolerate higher taxes in exchange for better public services, eventually. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Workers are already being squeezed. Median household income after housing costs remains below pre-COVID levels. The poorest fifth of households have seen no income growth in 19 years. Fiscal drag is pulling millions into higher tax brackets, eroding the value of pay rises. Businesses are cutting investment. Employment growth is at a 4-year low. Capital expenditure is weakening. Business confidence has collapsed. And international competitiveness is declining as Britain converges toward European tax levels without European service quality. The comparison to France and Germany is instructive. Those countries have always had high tax burdens, but they also have functioning healthcare systems, robust social care, excellent infrastructure, and comprehensive welfare. Britain is attempting to fund European-style services with a workforce and economy built for a lower tax model. It won't work, at least not without fundamental reform. So what should Britain do? Option 1. Commit to high taxes, high services. If Britain wants European tax levels, it needs European service quality. That means massive investment in NHS capacity and productivity. Comprehensive social care reform with proper funding. Infrastructure spending at German levels. Long-term tax and spending certainty, so businesses can plan. This is the social democratic model: high taxes, high services, high trust. It works in Scandinavia, France, Germany. But it requires political courage, cross-party consensus, and voter acceptance of permanently higher taxes. Option 2. cut taxes, cut services. The alternative: return to a lower tax, smaller state model. Except that the NHS can't be everything to everyone. Introduce more private provision. Ration care more explicitly. Reduce welfare generosity. This is politically toxic. The NHS is Britain's secular religion. Voters won't accept privatization or explicit rationing, even though implicit rationing already exists through waiting lists. Option 3. Reform without tax increases. The government's preferred narrative: achieve growth through efficiency and reform, without further tax rises. But this is fantasy. The NHS has been told to do more with less for 15 years. Productivity improvements of 2% per year would require gains the NHS has never sustained. The historical average is 0.7%. You can't reform your way out of demographic reality. An aging population costs exponentially more to treat. That's not inefficiency. It's mathematics. The uncomfortable truth: Britain is stuck. It can't afford the NHS and social care system it wants without higher taxes. But it can't raise taxes further without strangling growth and competitiveness. And it can't cut services without political backlash. This is the impossible trilemma of modern British politics. The 38.3% tax burden represents the government's attempt to resolve this trilemma through stealth taxation. Freeze thresholds. Raise taxes quietly. Avoid breaking election promises. Hope nobody notices. But people are noticing. Workers are seeing their take-home pay stagnate. Businesses are cutting investment. Growth is slowing, and the fiscal squeeze is only just beginning. The 2025 budget locked Britain into the highest tax burden in peacetime history. Whether it bankrupts workers or saves public services won't be clear for years. But one thing is certain: the next decade will determine whether Britain becomes a high-tax, high-service social democracy like France and Germany, or a high-tax, low-service failed state. Right now, we're on track for the latter. And that should terrify everyone. If this analysis has given you a clearer understanding of Britain's tax burden and what it means for your finances, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We'll continue tracking these developments as the budget impacts unfold over the coming years. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening to their paycheck. Knowledge is the first step toward change. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.